Zimkile ingoma matabane. Awkward Economist izama ukuzibuyisa sinyuka sisehla sibuza komeza ba inkomo yam ayityanga entsimini yakho mntana omqoba. Sifuna sikhangelana nale economy yase South Africa siyibika siyayikhangela sithi ipina phaya. Welcome to another week with the Awkward Economist, and we certainly, I think, have an interesting conversation this week that's really inspired by a friend of mine whose book has recently come out, Ncwadi kaWandile Sihlobo, and the book is called Finding Common Ground, and the book is more about land equity and agriculture, but our conversation is certainly not about that, but certainly around looking for opportunities to find common ground in the challenges that face particularly the marginalized portions of our economy. We've heard many conversations talking around the plight of education in the South African context. And this particular week, we're really just going to get into some ideas, and certainly not exhaustive, around how do we certainly get closer to improving educational outcomes in South Africa, and also making education certainly work for the economy and work for the economic participants, which are the young people, the middle-aged people, and nani maxhego na maxhegwazana. One of the first things, of course, that's been quite a challenge in the context of how we understand the things that result in poor educational outcomes in South Africa is certainly the social dynamics that go into that. I'll make the example and say that if you look at one particular province, the Eastern Cape, some of the schools, they are so far apart that the schools can't get to the right kind of capacity where then you can have the right kind of staff teaching at the right kind of level, and as a result what you find is one teacher having to teach multiple subjects, and already that means then the children are set up for failure. And therefore when we come out and we look and we say, no, the educational outcomes in South Africa are certainly problematic and the kids that are coming out are not the right level, have we gotten and allowed ourselves to get to the bottom of the challenges that are facing particularly those communities? Of course, this is just one example that will then certainly go into the first solution that we certainly can bring to the marketplace in how we solve for the educational conundrum. One of the challenges that we find in the South African economy is the maths and science outcomes, and they certainly are not at the right level, particularly given, as I said, the resource constraints that we find in the economy. So the first thing that we ought to think of is that how do we look at capacitating schools and the children that go to those schools in a way in which we can improve maths and science outcomes. The first opportunity is looking at how do we build and invest in and support maths and science centers, elokishini. And so for me, what this would be is that this would be a science and a maths center that is within a particular proximity to a number of schools, let's say a 4-kilometer radius to however many schools that are within a 4-kilometer radius. That center would then be capacitated with the right kind of teachers, tutors, mentors, as well as the infrastructure, lab equipment, and all of those things that provide ancillary services to the work that's already happening in the schools. So kids would be able to then move from school to the center to learn a little bit more and enhance their understanding of the curriculum, utilizing the centralized node of maths and science as a center. This way it means that you can start bringing kids closer to the things that will enable them to understand what they require to understand to be able to improve their outcomes. It also ensures that we can best utilize the limited resources that we've got as an economy, and starting, I think, also looking at ways and say, where do we actually start? Over and above that, we always talk around educational outcomes and what we expect from them, but at which point do we talk around how these educational outcomes must inform the kind of economic structure that we are building towards? If we say, for example, that we are building towards a services-led economy, what kind of skills does that require, and therefore what do we need to do in the investment portion of our curriculum to ensure that the kids then are future-proofed for the kind of economy that we're building. If we want agriculture to be one of the largest contributors to our economy, given its ability to also absorb unskilled labor, where is the investment into agricultural colleges? So it certainly means that we need to certainly move towards a closer alignment between the Department of Education as well as the economic cluster to ensure that all of the plans that we have from an educational strategy point of view closely mimic the plans that we've got from an economic planning point of view. Again, these are some of the things that I would absolutely love to hear coming from our leadership in the country, just so that we know that they are employing systems thinking to understand that what we do on the one side will certainly have an impact in terms of the outcomes that we see on the other side. Over and above that, we certainly also have ideas and recommendations for private sector as well as public sector in the way in which we certainly can play our role in improving, I think, the marginal outcomes of certain economic participants in the context of the South African economy. And one such opportunity is understanding how multidimensional poverty impacts the way in which labor participation actually takes place. And so, there are people, for example, who only have 2 meals a day. What does that mean for productivity? There are people who are first-generation degree holders. What does that mean for that particular family? And so, if organizations, for example, can do a multidimensional poverty assessment to understand what portion of your labor force doesn't eat 3 meals a day, what portion of your labor force is first generation or no generation degree holders, and then you ensure that all your learning and development and your training is targeted at accelerating the participation of these first degree holders, 0 degree holders into a space where they can certainly improve their educational outcomes, and the marginal benefit it'll have to their families is certainly way more than approaching, for example, who comes from a family where certainly there were previous degree holders than him. It also means that where people might not have enough nutrition in terms of how that may improve or impact their productivity, these are some of the things that you can certainly work on to ensure that those are improved. There's other things also that are multidimensional factors towards poverty incidence in terms of health outcomes. How many organizations, for example, are able or thinking around bringing nurses on a regular basis to their organizations to ensure that people have access at least to the prescribed minimum benefit in terms of primary healthcare support to ensure again that they are operating at the right level so that they can support their families. These are all the things that certainly move towards impacting educational outcomes, productivity outcomes, as well as then the future proofing of the economy in the way in which we envisage it. So ngoba besitshilo okwa economists eyazincedisa basikhangele nje inkomo eziphuluke nazo inkomo zethu yile economy siyibangayo sithi okwa economists is back. Khangela umeza, khangela cousin, brother, sister, would you please man subscribe, let's share the information, and let's get to a more detailed and a better understanding of the South African economy, some of the challenges that face us, and of course utilize this platform to start bringing solutions that certainly can start to work towards improving the educational outcomes as well as the socio-developmental outcomes of all South Africans. Ak Vrystaat, Transvaal is God.